All right. Welcome everybody to Podward State. And joining us today is an Onward State alumni, a former photographer for the blog. He now lives and works in D.C. And for the past few months or so, he has been an independent photographer documenting protests in Washington, D.C. So once again, let's welcome to the show, Oyoma Asinor. Oyoma, how you doing, man?
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm doing good, man. And I've been on an OS for about a year now, actually, and it's so crazy how things kind of come full circle. Now you guys have pulled me back into doing OS stuff, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. So I guess just to start out, to give the listeners a little introduction to your experience at Penn State and with Onward State, let's start from the very start. How'd you first come to Penn State? What drew you to the school over some of your other choices?
Yeah, so I went to North Penn High School in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, a suburb about 40 minutes away from Philadelphia. For me, financially, my only real options for college were in-state, right? So that was Temple, Drexel, Penn State were my big three. Applied to all three, got scholarships for Drexel and Temple. Did not get one for Penn State, although I did get one. I was really small at the beginning. So I got accepted to both Temple and Drexel first. Applied to Penn State, as my, not a reach, but as my in-state sort of reach school, I guess you could say. Got my acceptance letter and was like, all right, I'm going there. I had never been to Penn State before then, never really cared about the school, never went to Penn State football, never even really knew anything about the school. For some reason, I got the acceptance letter. I was like, in my head, I was like, I'm going there. So I turned down money from other schools to go to Penn State. And that's kind of how I ended up there. The first time I was ever on the campus was for orientation. It was the first day I was there. So I had no preconceived notion of what Penn State was like, nothing. I was like, you know what, I'm going here. This is kind of it, and we'll just see how it goes. And that's kind of how my life has been up until now. It's just all right, I guess that's the way we're doing things. So, and it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
So anyway, how did you get started in photography, and then how did you end up with Onward State?
In high school, I was originally on a path to not even go to college, actually. I was actually in a technical school, part-time working on cars, and that's what I really love to do. And I still love to do it now, obviously. But at a certain point, I think it was my sophomore year of high school, I was like, I want to go to college. I was in a science class with kids who didn't know how ice worked, and I was like, you know what, this is not for me. I'm going to go to college. So I went to my advisor, or I guess the principal at the time, however that worked. I was like, hey, I want to leave this behind. I want to go to college and blah, 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 blah. So I was told that my options were I had to take a language, and then I also had to take an art class. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't sculpt. I had no interest in art. I was never good at it, never really cared about art. But photography was an option. And my neighbor at the time was taking photography. I was like, you know what, this seems kind of like a fun, mess around type class. I'll take it just to graduate and move on. So I came home one day and I told my dad, I was like, Dad, I'm taking photography. And he was like, what? You had never expressed any kind of interest in anything with cameras, nothing even related with art. And I was so adamant about I'm doing photography. So my dad bought me this really, really crappy plastic DSLR that must have cost $50 on eBay, which is the bare minimum to take the class. And I took the class my freshman, or I guess sophomore year now. Again, just to really hang out with some of the people I knew there. And I was maybe one of 4 males in that course. The rest were women. So I'm kind of learning about how stuff works, and I'm just hanging out with my friends and having fun. And I just kept doing it. So I did it from sophomore year to my senior year of high school, submitted my AP art thesis and got college credit for it. Ended up, in college, just walked onto the Penn State campus and just ended up taking my camera literally everywhere. I take it to class, I take it to downtown and just take it. It was always be on my arm or on my shoulder. And I'm the kind of person where once I get an interest in something, I want to learn everything there is to know about it. So that really for me was just learning everything I possibly could on my own. High school provided a foundation in terms of here's how aperture works, here's how ISO works, here's how your shutter speed works. But it wasn't until I got to freshman year of college where I was sitting down at my desk all the time, just learning and reading and watching videos and understanding how cameras work and learning about the history of photography as an art form. It's funny because I remember when I moved in, my RA was knocking on people's doors, introducing themselves to us. And I was sitting at my desk editing photos that I had taken while I was moving in. And I had climbed a parking structure and was editing photos off the roof. And my RA was wow, blah, blah, blah. We had a little conversation about it. But from the very first day I was there, photography just became something that I did. And I never had expected to even become a photographer, if I can call myself that, because I played sports in high school. I was never an art kid, nothing like that. But here we are, and things just kind of work out in ways you don't expect. But I think they often work out in better ways than you plan. So I think this is, kind of one of those things. Joining Onward State, I joined Onward State my sophomore year. I saw a post on Twitter, and one of my friends at the time was like, "Hey, you should go try to photograph stuff for Onward State. Like, I'm pretty sure they have access to, concerts and shows and all this stuff you could go like practice on." And I was like, "Oh, word, that sounds like a really great opportunity." So I applied through, I believe it was a tweet, and it was like a Google form. And then I interviewed with two people who I believe were the visual editors at the time. And that was kind of it. So I joined Onward State as a staff photographer, really specialized in shooting concerts and shows. And then obviously shooting Thon I did that twice. And those are the best experiences I've ever had with Onward State, was shooting Thon. And just the adrenaline of like having to be here and do this. You got to be here. I need you here. And run around all day long for, 48 something hours over an entire weekend. I'll never forget those experiences. And I wouldn't have those experiences if it wasn't for OS.
Can you tell a little bit about how you ended up in DC and what that experience has been like?
Kind of the same thing as my entering Penn State experience. I was applying, I had done an extra semester. So I graduated in the fall of last year. So it's about a year now that I graduated. And I'm applying to jobs, like just trying to figure out how my life is going to go. I was in a really not great place at the time with my own housing situation. School's wrapping up, my grades aren't the best. How am I going to get a job? And kind of just doing all this stuff. So I ended up getting an offer from the only company I thought would never want to interview me. And they're based out in McLean, Virginia. So now I'm planning around having to move to McLean, but I feel like I'm always the kind of person who just wants more all the time. And especially for me, I need to be around people and be in a big city and be around the hustle and bustle and people moving and doing stuff. And obviously in DC, the most politically powerful people in the country live and work here. So I was like, you know what? I'm not going to live in McLean. It'd be really convenient instead of having to take the train an hour each way to go to work, but I'm going to move to DC. And same exact thing. I'd never been to DC before, aside from one field trip, I believe in middle school. And I was like, you know what, this is just kind of where I'm going to go. So I ended up here in January of this past year at the end of the month. I was essentially working and just doing adult stuff, as weird as it is to say, because that makes me feel old. It's so strange because I'm working and kind of doing normal stuff for a couple months, and then COVID lockdown hits. So I'm like, man, I don't know anybody in the city. And now I live by myself. I have my own apartment, but now I'm like, wow, I really can't get to know people, even in my company, in my office. Now I can't go out and meet people my own age. And that was kind of rough. So for a couple months, that was not the best experience. Everything with Black Lives Matter started happening. And all of a sudden, it's I went from having essentially no one to being around thousands of different people every single day. And that transition was also not easy either. And it's tough because, again, I'm so new here. I've only been here for 3 or 4 months at that point. I don't know anybody. So I have to maneuver and get to know people in ways that is safe for myself and safe for them. But the community here has been excellent. You come out here every single day in the streets and you just meet so many different people with so many different perspectives and so many different stories to tell. And that's always been my favorite part is, one night, for example, we were standing 5 feet away from riot cops, and this history professor, this old guy, walks up to me, white history professor, and we had a conversation for must have been 3 hours, just talking about how he's going to teach this to his students, my experiences as a mixed Black man, having just moved here, and stuff like that really does enforce your sense of I kind of belong here now.
What started your interest in covering and documenting the protests that have happened so far? Was it sort of this realization of this is something I need to be a part of? Was it more this is something big, let me go grab my camera?
So I remember I was sitting right here at my desk, and I had just either gotten home from work or something, and I saw an Instagram story post from one of my favorite musical artists, who's also from the DMV. And it was a short story post, and it was protests for the George Floyd killing at 14th and U. Do I want to go to this? What is this? What is going to go on here? So Frank, I texted Frank, and I was like, dude, I think there's something happening, not that far from my apartment. It's a couple blocks up the street. I'm taking my camera and I'm going. And I remember this day so clearly because the battery in my camera was half charged because I was using it the day before and never thought I would need it for today to actually do stuff. So I was like, Frank, I'm going to take my camera. I'm ripping up to 14th and U. I guess I'll text you when I get back. And I didn't get back home until like 3 o'clock the next morning because I had been out all night. Of course, my camera died somewhere along the way, but it's interesting because there's just this like feeling that you get of like, this is something I have to be here. And I've had this conversation with so many other journalists and media people and obviously frontline protesters, but we literally have gone days where we're like up at 8 in the morning and like don't go home until 3 or 4 in the morning the next day, out in the street all day long, every single day. And you have to ask yourself, why do we do this? Because there's obviously personal life stuff that has to happen for us too, right? We all have friends and family, and that has all changed with COVID restrictions and all of that. But you know, you look around and it's like, what is like when does our normal life come back into play? And for us, like that isn't even the thing that we register. Like the only thing we really care about is being out here and protesting for Black Lives Matter, or being a medic, or being a reporter, or being a journalist, or being whatever your role is. And it's just something that like you feel it in your chest, and it's like, I can't sit here and not do anything about this. I can't go to my dinner with my friends or go bar hopping with my friends, or because this is happening right now, and it's happening like 3 blocks away, and it's like, this is the time. Obviously, unfortunately, so many people have passed from COVID. So many people, millions of Americans are unemployed. Are we ever going to get this set of opportunities to really create change ever again? People are no longer afraid to protest because they might not have jobs to go back to, and their employers might not be able to fire them because they don't have employers. Now that they don't have work, what is there for these people to lose? A lot of these people don't have any. When you go out to Black Lives Matter Plaza or 16th Street, so many people who are protesting, they were homeless people. Like, they don't have a place to go. They would sleep and eat and like shower on that very street. But when are we ever going to get the circumstances to actually maybe create effective change on a street level and not be worried about, I might get fired tomorrow because someone took a picture of me at a protest, or I might lose my job because I felt it was necessary for me to go out in the streets and fight. You know, like, when are we ever going to get these circumstances ever again? Where there's just like this boiling pot, and it's finally boiled over, and we have the circumstances to actually do something about it. So it really is just like this gut feeling that you get of like, if I'm not there, I feel weird. Like, I feel anxious when I'm not protesting, or I don't have my camera in my hand. I feel anxious and strange. Like, I don't like sitting here when I'm not doing something that I think I should be doing.
We've seen from police the murders of Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Ahmaud Arbery, and I'm from State College, and we had Osazi got murdered less than 2 years ago. What made the killing of George Floyd different? What made that the turning point, and why is this movement so much stronger than we've seen in the past?
Yeah, so I'm going to give an answer that I think a lot of people don't want to hear, especially Black people. I think, and this is a reality that we all have to face, is that we've all become so incredibly numb to this. It's like you lose somebody, a Black child gets shot, a person of color gets shot, someone gets strangled by an officer. For me, like, you mentioned all of these names, and there's so many hundreds of more names that you have not mentioned, but you just feel numb inside it. It's like, well, what are we ever going to do about this? Like, at a certain point, it's like, okay, someone else died. Like, is this going to happen tomorrow? And I think what really this particular death got people to do something about it is because of one of the circumstances. We could see for the first real potent time just how bad this is. When this man is screaming for his own mother and is being strangled in the hands of police. Like, I think people have finally said enough is enough. Like, I mentioned this analogy of this pot that's boiling, and it boils and boils and boils until it overflows. I feel like this particular killing was that overflow, where I don't think you could ever look at something like that and be like, okay, you know, you can't be numb to this one. Like, this one makes you want to do something. And obviously now the focus has shifted to the Black lives we have lost in between, the Jacob Blake shooting, the Breonna Taylor's ruling, it all just becomes like this melting pot of like, let's deal with all of it with it now. But I think George Floyd's killing is the catalyst for it.
Ever since the George Floyd killing, there's been widespread protests all around the country, and D.C. has been a particular city where it has not slowed down for like pretty much over 100 days now. How has like the scenes that you've been seeing and documenting evolved over these last few months?
Like the first night in Lafayette Park, which is the park that sits outside the White House, and people were allegedly throwing bricks at cops with shields. Like, we've gone from that to actively discouraging and outright kicking out people who feel they need to throw things at officers. And the way that we move is different. The way that we organize is a lot different. Several pockets of groups have sprung up. and they all kind of have their own individual politics and their own individual viewpoints and things that you can get behind. But at the end of the day, we're all here for the same reason, like on the whole, right? But we've gone from just pure chaos and rage, and rightfully so, I totally agree with that, to now we have very specific groups with very specific goals and very specific views. And you can follow a group. For us, like social media and Instagram is such a big thing for how we organize and how we spread this message. Like you can find a group that I agree with from an ideological standpoint or a political standpoint, and go march with them. Or the group that I march with, for example, is mostly queer, trans, femme, non-binary, LGBTQ+, the whole spectrum, specifically for Indigenous and folks of color. So I chose to follow that group because that's a group that I think I have a lot to learn from. And that group to me is extremely important. I consider all those folks family now, but there's groups like DC Protest and Palm Collective, and everyone has like a little name, but we can all sort of come together for one big thing if we need it. So seeing at least the way the organizations have moved and grown and evolved into their own little pockets of things is great. And things now are starting to slow down just a little bit, not to the fault of organizers in any way. It's mostly with the way that NPD is actively targeting and stalking certain people in these movements. So at least for our safety, we kind of have to fall back at least for now. But yeah, like the way things have evolved has changed. The violence, just like pure outright violence for May and June and, late May, early June has kind of disappeared for the most part. It just takes different forms. So instead of us on June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, staring down a line of cops and SORT, which is a prison unit that specializes in putting down prison riots, I believe it was Air Force, SWAT, FBI. We've gone from staring those people in the face to now like police will ambush us in the middle of the night. Mostly MPD, federal police, park police, stuff like that. So their tactics have changed as well. So like now the conflict doesn't really happen during the day. The conflict mostly happens at night. And obviously at night, these mainstream cable media outlets can't afford to keep their people on the ground. And the police know that. So when it's just us protesters and some street journalists marching, they know they can take advantage of us at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. So instead of setting up a strict line, like a border or a barrier from which we can, face these officers, they'll just wait while we're marching through a neighborhood. And when we get up on a dark street, they'll come out of nowhere on their bikes and just start hitting people and beating people and arresting people. And then they'll just leave. And that happens over and over again. So our tactics have changed, and so has law enforcement. Their tactics have also changed.
Why, your work and the work of, other on the ground reporters, independents like yourself that aren't connected to the mainstream media. I think the reason why your work is so important is because, what you guys are documenting, it's authentic, it's unedited. There's no filter, there's no bias, there's no slant. Pretty much what I'm saying is like what you witness every day is far different than what the TV is telling people. Like, can you elaborate on those stark differences a bit? And
even now, right? Like I would assume if you only know about Black Lives Matter from television news or even paper news, you might not even think this is going on because they don't report on it anymore. They just don't. Cable news, etc., only come out when things are really violent and really bad. And there's a laundry list of reasons as to why that is. Mostly has to do with profit and how they can keep their channels afloat. The thing with big outlets is they have a little bit of immunity, but not as much as you would think, right? So we saw when Donald Trump did his attack on 16th Street to take the photo op in front of the church with the Bible upside down. There were mainstream press outlets there, but even they were being beat with riot shields. I'm sure you've all seen the clip of the one reporter, I believe from Australia, be hit in the stomach with a riot shield. And I'm like, that guy's a reporter with a giant camera. Like, you can't mistake him for anybody. He's credentialed, like this is his full-time job. And then you have someone like me with, this isn't my primary camera, but with like a little camera like this, dressed in black. They will treat us even worse than they treat mainstream media outlets. Like they target us to get our cameras off the street. So people don't understand and don't know what's happening here. And there's a big target not only on my back, but from some of my other comrades' backs as well. Even from just having cameras and reporting. I still don't consider myself a reporter or anything like that, but I started this back in May and tried to do the whole objective journalism thing with like the way that I would speak and the way that I would write. Just because like, I don't want to lose my day job. I have like probably like friends or family, or people might see this and be like, well, that guy is think blah, 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 blah. But at a certain point, man, like again, like I don't work for anybody. I work for myself. I don't even consider it work. I love doing this. I wouldn't be doing anything else with my time. So I went from very neutral language on my primary platform is Instagram currently, to just being like, you know, for lack of a better term, like screw this. Like I've never been the kind of person to hold back anything, especially if I have something to say about it, and like my close friends all know that. I can't sit here and describe what I'm seeing in like neutral terms. It doesn't work like that, especially as a mixed Black man who has to sit here every single day and not only see so many atrocities, but like I have feelings too about this. You know what I mean? Like I don't really care if I'm media or not. I'm supposed to act a certain way. I don't have National Press Association credentials. I don't work for anybody. I don't work for any kind of group that is supposed to like grassroots organize. Like I don't do those things because it gives me freedom in what I want to say and what I want to do and how I operate. So now like there's a shift in the way that I present and the way that I talk about these things, from protesters and police clash on 16th Street to cussing in my captions, for example, or writing things about the way that I'm feeling. And like only now, like today, am I starting to go back and retroactively talk about the things that I was experiencing back in May, because I didn't feel the need or the strength to do it then. So like even today, I was like, you know, like this is stuff that happened back in May and the way that I was feeling. Like I literally had seen a Black woman be shot in the chest point blank range with a less than lethal cannon, like a little like the little hockey puck round, was shot in her chest point blank. And this is on June 3rd. I'm sorry, like a couple days before that. But she had been shot right in front of me on the front line in her chest with a less than lethal round. And I sling my camera on my back so I have both hands free. I have to pick her body up off of the ground and drag her back to where the medics are so that she can receive some kind of medical attention. At the same time, there's like a flashbang going off in my right ear, and there's like tear gas coming from my left. And there's a lot of emotional energy and just like and weight that comes with doing that back then I wasn't comfortable with sharing, but now I could be like, okay, this is how it really was. And not only do I have feelings about the things that I've been through, but the things I see. So I'm not just telling you about the things that I see anymore. This is like unfiltered how I feel about it. Like, yeah, I'm going to cuss on this platform. Like, if you know me, you know that's how I talk. Like, professionalism is white supremacy. Just give it a different shirt for work. I don't believe in being professional. Like, I have to, but yeah, I'm going to cuss in these captions sometimes. Yeah, I'm going to tell you about how it really feels to be Black and be involved in this. Because if I don't, then what is the point of me even doing this? Like, are you really getting anything out of viewing these images? Like, it's one thing to see an image and connect with it, but I believe that like my power is in telling you not only what I see, but how I feel about it. And people who like are legitimate press or have credentials don't have that kind of power. So my power is in being like, I'm not press on paper, so I can say whatever I want. And if you don't like it, you can go look at somebody else's stuff. I don't care. My block list on Instagram for hate comments is so long. Like I purge all of it. You're like, my platform is not a place for you to get off your hate speech, racial hate speech, right-wing hate speech. It's none of that. Like, I'm not a reporter. You're not going to do that here. So if I don't like what you're saying, like, you're just going to get blocked. And like, but actual press people and media can't do that. So I operate differently. And I feel like also at the end of the day, this community is portrayed a certain way by certain media outlets, whether that's being uneducated or slightly barbaric even. Like, we've seen the way that these news channels report and the way that they show us to move and operate, right? But these people have legitimate frustrations, man. Like, and if I can like sort of lend them a voice, that they might be too afraid to, if their employer saw their Instagram tomorrow with like FTP written on it, for example, like they might get fired. I don't care. Like, I legitimately don't care. Like, that's my power in being able to give this voice to community and say things that they might not be able to say. And yeah, I do face the same risk as well, especially with my current employment. But at the end of the day, man, like, this is more important than that to me.
One thing that's happened to you that I feel like could be interesting to dive into was your experience being arrested.
We had done a march, ended up back at Black Lives Matter Plaza. Someone threw a water bottle, but we were all like, don't do that. If you're going to throw something, throw it in the front, because it's people always in the back who want to throw things and put people in the front at risk. And I guarantee you the person who threw a water bottle or thought they had the balls to do it was from someone who's not from DC, because that was from March on Washington weekend and like millions of people had thrown it. Someone threw a water bottle, and there's no notice of this is now an unlawful assembly. There's no notice of this is now a riot. There's no notice of you're in violation of code 69XXX, whatever. There's no notice of anything. I have my camera and I'm talking to my friend and I'm like, hey, we should probably get ready to leave now because this doesn't feel right. And you kind of get that intuition. And one of the officers walks up from the back and like rolls a flash grenade onto the ground without saying anything. And then, you hear the explosion and you're like, okay, well now like, things aren't going to be good. So 3 cops with cannons of mace hop the barrier, again, with no warning of unlawful assembly, nothing, and start walking down Black Lives Matter Plaza. So I'm like talking to my friend, I'm like, hey, we should try to get in front of this because we absolutely do not, want to be behind a line of cops because it's just bad news in general. So I start to walk to in front of the officers and like start recording with my phone and my camera in the other hand. They start like spraying indiscriminately, all this stuff. And one of them just starts running, like full on sprinting. And you can hear the sound of the boots like hit the ground. And like I couldn't see him, but you could hear the boots. And I was like, okay, like now this is not good because this is what they did back about a month ago in Adams Morgan, where they arrested 41 people in a mass unlawful arrest. So you hear the boots and you're like, okay, well now we have to run. So I turn around and I have my phone behind me. And like I'm holding the recording button, hoping that I get some kind of footage out of this just in case something goes wrong. Pull my phone back and like I'm smashing the upload button, like hoping it goes up. I have no idea if it does. And the whole time they had police officers on the street in front of us already, in what's called a kettle, which is extremely illegal, by the way. You're not allowed to do that. They had police officers ready to kettle with bikes. So my friend is going to my left, I'm looking to my right. And obviously like we both have cameras. He's like a legitimate accredited press reporter. And I'm like, okay, I should be able to make it out of this because I'm not, like I have a camera, like that's all I'm really here for right now currently. And then an officer's like dealing with someone to my right, so I'm going to try to go that way. And then a black female officer stands up and like sticks her arm out and like clotheslines me. So like now I'm hitting her arm and I'm like, okay, crap. And she's like, get on the ground. I'm like, press. I'm like holding up my camera, phone, camera, press, media, press, whatever. She's like, I don't care, get on the ground. And I'm repeatedly asking, am I being detained? I must have asked this question like 20 times. I have my camera in my hand. I'm like, hey, like, can you see this? Like, hey, here's my phone. I'm like recording. Press, media, press. Asking again and again if I'm being detained. No answer. Refused to answer my question. So I'm laying there on the ground now with my face like shoved in the concrete, and my camera's on my right, my phone's on my left. I'm asking like, am I being detained? And she finally says yes. And I'm like, well, what for? I'm pressed. Like I've been published in the Washington Post at this point. Even if I don't have credentials, like I've been published, like, come on now. I asked her, what am I being detained for? No answer. Laying there on the ground for like, must have been like another 40 minutes. Another officer tells me to get up and brings me to a group of about 13 other people. I would be 14 in that case. I'm repeatedly asking, like, am I being detained? What am I being detained for? No answer. Laying there on the concrete for, well, we did the math when we got to the holding facility, was about 2 hours. Just laying there on the ground, like, didn't know what was going to happen. I was arrested with another photographer, drop in, like, actual reporter style photographer. His cameras were, like, kind of smashed, and, like, mine was too. And they finally, like, okay, like, they start pulling the vans in. So we're like, okay, we're actually going to be arrested now. Like, the whole time I was kind of, like, hoping that they might just let us go without having to go through the whole process of like putting us in like jail. Then they bring the vans in. I'm like, okay, well, crap. I guess I'm actually going to jail now. And behind me is a woman who's been screaming for the past hour, maybe like for the past, legitimately screaming for the past hour and a half. I didn't want to turn around because I didn't want to move because there's officers with guns on us. So I'm like, I don't want to turn around and look, but I can hear her. From what I understood, an officer had like sat or like kneeled on her leg and broke it. You could hear like the pain in her voice, like in the bottom of her throat, that this was bad. Like her leg was probably broken. So she's repeatedly asking to be sent to a hospital because an officer broke her entire leg. Was at first denied medical attention. And then after about an hour, they brought a gurney in and loaded her up in there. So she did not go in the vans with us. To my right on the sidewalk, there was another person I was arrested with, and they were having a mental health episode. Couldn't breathe, had a really bad anxiety attack, and were repeatedly asking for medical attention and or preferably a mental health professional. And I remember 2 officers who were standing near her were just laughing at her. Like she would ask repeatedly, like, can I go to, like, because now someone's been being wheeled away to the hospital. Like, can I at least go with that person? Like, medical attention, please, like mental health professional. And these 2 officers were just laughing in her face. So I'm sitting with a group of people. They also arrested 2 of our medics. And the 2 medics are trying to coach her through like how to come down from this anxiety attack because she can't breathe from across the street. So the girl who's having the anxiety attack asked the officers if they could like walk her over to the group of us so like she wouldn't be alone and they could like better coach her through that and stuff like that. The officers like picked her up and like dragged her halfway, like literally dragged her like halfway across the street and like just laid her there. So she had her hands behind her back in cuffs and had to crawl with her face to the group of us to at least be closer to the medics. And she finally made it after, which was like, must have been like 10 minutes. And like, it was so hard to watch, like her, like use her chin and like her whole face to move herself over concrete to be with us and like just feel safe. Another person I was arrested with was closer to the person having a mental health episode. He had been maced so much that the mace was condensating and dripping off of his face in orange droplets. Like this wasn't sweat. The condensation from the spray was sprayed so much it was like just pouring off of his face. And he was wearing a blue surgical style face mask, like those the dollar ones you get. It had turned orange from the amount of spray that they used on him, and particularly in his face. His mask is still on, so now he has to breathe through the mask, which is covered in pepper spray. His whole face is covered in pepper spray. He can't open his eyes and stuff like that. So he's repeatedly asking for medical attention. Is denied medical attention several times. He was never taken to the hospital like the other girl was. He was just thrown in the van with us. So they tell me to get up. I have my camera like still strapped to my body and like my hands are up behind my back in metal cuffs. And they bring you over to the van. And I'm asking, what I'm assuming is the detective now, am I being detained? Yes. Okay. Am I being arrested? Also yes. Then I ask him, what for? And he says, for felonious rioting. And I'm like, I have a camera. Like, I'm clearly pressed. Like, I've been published. And, like, this other guy has cameras. He has 2 cameras. Like, you're charging us with felonious rioting? I told him, like, look at that guy over there. This guy that was arrested with us was, like, maybe 50. Like, had gray hair. It was, like, 50, 55 years old. You're charging this guy with felonious rioting, too. Like, he's a rioter to you? The guy, one of the other officers, like, unstraps my camera from my chest. Like, takes all my stuff, takes all my jewelry off, like, takes my earrings off, necklace, everything that wasn't absolutely essential. Takes all of your shoelaces off, throws them in a bag. For evidence. My face mask was thrown in the bag for evidence, so I'll be exposed to people without masks, and I don't have a mask on either. And then they throw you in a van and like, yeah, that's it. So you're kind of like stripped of everything you have, all of your possessions, and like now your humanity, which also happened even more in depth in the actual facilities we were in. But yeah, so they charged us all with felony rioting. We essentially had disappeared off the face of the earth for 17 hours. They always tell you, or like, like one of your rights is when you're going to be ready to Miranda rights. Didn't happen to any of us. And you're also guaranteed a phone call. That's complete bullshit. Only 2 of us got phone calls, myself and another protester. But we didn't make phone calls out. Someone had called for us. And the only reason why that was is because someone we were close with in the movement knew that we were arrested and had connects with the Lawyers Guild and like had connects with lawyers. So they asked for us, but only for 2 of us out of 14. The other 12 disappeared off the face of the earth for 17 hours, like some black site prison shit. Like, legitimately just disappeared. Like we disappeared for 20 hours. No one knew where we were. People knew where I was and where the other person who got a phone call was because we knew somebody. But if it wasn't for that, no one would know where we were. So we got out of the federal jail where we were released out of. We spent time in federal jail too, and that's even worse. No phones, nothing, no possessions, no keys, nothing, no wallet, because that's all stuck at the initial facility they send you to is evidence. So you're supposed to go back there and pick it up, but how? We don't have a phone. Like we don't have anything. How are we supposed to? We don't have cars. We don't have keys. We can't go back to our apartments or houses. We can't even get back into the places we live at. How are we supposed to do anything? So luckily, one of the best things about this community here is we've put together what we call jail support. So whenever people get arrested at a protest, a lot of the organizers and organizations come together and they legit wait outside of the federal jail all day long until all of us get out. So there were people there for our jail support from 11 in the morning until 7:30 at night, and they just wait. And they have like food and blankets and laptops and like extra phones if we need it. They have like everything you could, more than I could ever ask for coming out of jail because we had legitimately nothing. But if it wasn't for those people, I don't know how we would have done anything. One of the people I was arrested with flew in from Louisiana and was staying in a hotel. So now his hotel had no idea where he was, so they charged him for extra time. He took a plane, like a flight, missed the flight, and now had no way to reschedule or let the airline know why he missed the flight or the fact that he even missed it because he has no phone. So luckily the jail support crew like paid for his ticket and paid for his hotel stay. Like that, like that's what this community is all about. But yeah, we were just kind of thrown out on the street. We were like, I don't know, like, what do you want to do? So luckily jail support had people with cars and they drove us back to go get our keys and stuff. We did not get our phones. I don't think anyone got their phone back. I missed time at work. I had to email my dad when I got back to my apartment telling him what happened. He already knew because the person on the phone had told him. But can you imagine how messed up that is? Like if you just disappeared for 20 hours and your own parents didn't know where you were. And like you live in a city like 3 hours away from your hometown. And you can't even call them. You have to like send them an email and like hope that your parents see the email. And like 12 o'clock in the mornings when I got back, I think like it's incredible to think about. And like there's a lot of stuff that happened in federal jail that's even worse than that. But like to make a long story short, that's kind of like what that experience was like. They take everything away from you. Your humanity is like just stripped inside of not only the holding facility but in federal jail too. And we were kept in like what I think is like supermax. I think like maximum security federal jail, like not like where they keep the plebeians. Like we were kept with people who had legitimate like drug trafficking felonies, like people who did some bad stuff. So that's kind of what that whole experience is like. And they charge you with this felony riot charge that they know won't stick. Like there's no way you can prove. I think the amount is like $5,000 worth of damage. The only thing that happened there was someone threw a water bottle. But you're gonna charge us with it, 14 people altogether, just so we can get us off the street for like a day. And they know it's not going to stick. So why they even go through that? Why do you even go through that? It's just to punish us for exercising our First Amendment right. That's all it is.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, one of the parts that stuck out to me was your talk with that professor about, what he wants to talk about his students with. Like I said, that's something that really appeals to me as someone who's, currently studying to be a teacher. And we've had a lot of these conversations in my classes. A big focus of my teacher education has been on social justice, because with a lot of these issues, not only are we advocates for ourselves as teachers, but sometimes we have to be advocates for our students as well, helping represent the communities that we teach in and we understand and we live in. So I guess first, to start the topic of education, how do you think we can start these conversations of social justice early in schools? And what do you think teachers like myself can do to make sure voices are heard and given platforms?
I had never really understood what activism was or my love for it that I have for it now until I was in the street doing it. There's obviously different kinds of activism. You can be a tutor or a teacher, or you can get people to sign petitions or register for voting drives or set up a voting drive or get people to vote and do all these things. But street activism and street justice is where it all starts and also where it ends, in my opinion. So I mentioned the history professor because he took time out of his night from, I believe, grading papers, and he actually specializes in teaching kids with learning disabilities. My mom was a tutor in the same regard, so that really meant a lot to me too. But he chose to come out and like just see it for himself, because I've always thought like it's one thing to see this on social media or like in a book or hear about it from someone else, but you don't truly understand it until you've seen it with your own eyes or until your feet are on the ground. So getting out into the street is number one. Just talk to people. Just talk to people who are there. Like the reason why I love doing this so much is because I've met so many different kinds of people from so many different kinds of walks of life who all have different stories to share and different perspectives and upbringings. And it's just that exchange of knowledge. And like, I'm so thirsty for knowledge all the time. Like I just want to learn more and like absorb it. So when I meet someone on the street and we're talking about, like Black Lives Matter, or like where it should go, or where it's been, or like where we've been, or even just having like fun, casual conversations about like, stuff we've gotten into in college, stuff like that means a lot. So as someone who teaches, I think it's important to not only cement yourself in the movement for a little bit, but also bring that back to your students, because I've had this thought recently too, where like, we're going to see this in a book somewhere, in a history book. Like this is, for lack of a better explanation of it, our generation's civil rights movement. Like it's the same thing. Like look at the parallels from the original civil rights movement to what we're doing now. There's so many historical parallels that are being drawn there. So part of it is looking at it from that perspective and saying like, this is your time. Like this is your time as an activist, whether you're a street activist or you teach or tutor or do anything. Like you should want to look back on this and say that you gave this 110%. So as a teacher, I think part of that is being here and talking to people who live this every single day and getting their experiences. And yeah, like giving your kids a textbook and like teaching them and stuff too, but like teach from your own personal bank of knowledge and experience. And maybe that history professor went, hey, like last time I met this guy on the street who like takes photos sometimes and like had this stuff to share with me. And it might not necessarily be academia. It might not necessarily be something you can test on, but you might tell a story to a child or a kid that resonates with them and their upbringing, or where they've been in life, or if they've been in a bad place, they might hear your story of an interaction with somebody else who's been through the same thing. And that might resonate with them. And they might want to go do activism or teach or become a tutor or become a politician or do X, Y, Z thing because they heard it from you. And as a teacher, obviously your students will look up to you and respect you in some way, right? So imagine having that power to be like, okay, these are the things that I've heard about and lived and seen, and I'm going to bring that to you. And maybe some of this will resonate with you and your experience. And now you go do something with it too. Because I think we all know the realization at the end of the day that unfortunately, this is not going to be something we fix in this generation. And quite frankly, to be honest with you guys, I don't think this is going to be something we can fix in the next generation either. But the reason why we do it is because hopefully eventually one day, there's going to be one generation that doesn't have to deal with this, whether it's the next one or the one after. So if your students can go and be like, yeah, like I was taught by, Mr. Matthew, and he told us about 2020 and like Black Lives Matter. And like now I'm a teacher or a tutor, I'm teaching the next generation about Black Lives Matter and passing on his teachings and my own knowledge to my students, or I became a poll worker, or I became a congresswoman, or I became, I became a lawyer. Like, those experiences mean a lot. So just pass on those experiences and that knowledge to your students. That's incredibly important.
How do we have this sort of nationwide education, and how do we have these conversations? Because I feel like that's, a lot of the dialogue has been starting a conversation, but, when do we even know if we're having that conversation? What is the conversation? And I guess, how do you feel from an activist standpoint that we can start engaging in these discussions that are not poisoned by assumptions that people just heard of? With no other, background knowledge of, or just simply lack of empathy. Personally, that's what I feel a lot of, the venomous hatred we see in this country is from a lack of empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
So
well,
what would you say to that?
I think, and you might relate to this as someone who wants to be a teacher. Like I said, my mom was a substitute teacher for a while and like taught kids with learning disabilities. So like I have experience with having a parent who's a teacher too. I want to walk that back even further because the way American society is set up does not incentivize people becoming participants in their community or becoming volunteers or becoming teachers or becoming activists. You're always taught, like I went to college, or I entered college as a business major. I wanted to be like a suit wearing, floating like marketing major who like looked at numbers and they got paid 6 figures a year and like blah, 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 blah. There's no incentive to not do that in the way that we're taught in public schools, college, even kindergarten. Like you're always like, the American dream is to have the money and to go and be someone who makes 6-7 figures a year, be someone who's quote unquote successful because of monetary value. But what if instead of that, what if we not only but taught, but also incentivize people to become teachers or become volunteers at like their local Boys and Girls Club, or incentivize people to become community workers or become tutors or teachers, or like host a class, or just do anything, like start a garden or plant. So I don't know, like the focus has always been on go make some money. And that's kind of where I went into college with that mindset. As someone who like went into that, I was like, I want to go make, because I didn't really come from money. My family never really had much growing up. I want to go make, money to set myself up and set my parents up. But there's not enough being done to encourage people to step outside of themselves and become activists at a young age. So I think it starts with that lack of selfishness. It starts with, we need to have more conversations in the classroom with young kids and be like, you can go be a teacher and not spend half your salary spending it on school supplies, because that's what my mother had to do. Or you can go be a teacher and not have to worry about if your degree's in something abstract, like not having a position to teach in or not having a job, because it's quote unquote not important. But if you're an economics professor or a business professor, you've got a job, so people want to do that because of money, right? We need to have a conversation about what does it mean to step outside of ourselves and what we want to do as people, but what can we do for our community? I come back to this point a lot, especially recently. Like, what is the purpose of us being here? What's the point of life is a huge question, right? But I think what it really boils down to is living as much as you can, participating in your community in a positive way, and leaving the world in a better place than you found it. But we don't do enough of that kind of teaching in school. And this is not something I reached like years ago. This is a conclusion that I reached like relatively recently. So we need to start teaching people in school at a young age to maybe there's a better way than you just becoming a suit. And maybe you can go be an activist or a professor in your own little community or in your own nationwide community or your own worldwide community. And in terms of having a conversation about coming from a place of just ignorance, it also falls back on our educators too. the way that we approach education is so important. And I do legitimately think that it's getting better with every generation. I think on the whole, I think kids are getting better at this sort of thing. I know that's not the case everywhere and not for everybody, but there needs to be, instead of Black history being taught as Black history starts with slaves on a boat and being freed by a white man, Black history expands beyond that in either direction, exponentially more so than just that little period of time. You know, we talk about Black History Month in school, so we're going to learn about Frederick Douglass today, and then we're going to breeze past it and move on. But why don't we talk about Indigenous history more? Why don't we talk about Asian American history more? Because my mom is Filipina, so on top of racism, I also have to deal with xenophobia sometimes. Why don't we talk about Asian histories more? Why don't we, instead of focusing on just these like founding fathers messages, like all of this sort of stuff, if we teach our kids in school about the global stage earlier and more effectively, I think we're going to reach a better point much sooner. Because if you start bringing these kids together and learning that the American dream of the white picket fence and the dog and the wife or husband and you know the big house is like not what it's really cracked up to be, and there's a whole world outside of that, then there's going to be a stage set for a larger conversation to be had rather than individualism and what I can do for myself. And then let's turn that conversation on its head to what can I do for others and what can I do for the people around me.
I was just wondering if you had thoughts on how Penn State has responded to racial and social injustice around campus and downtown and State College, including football team with their plan on adding social justice statements to their uniforms, and if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this, actually. And I saw the tweet storm that happened over the summer with the whole incident, what was it, like the kid and his dad incident. Like, I kind of followed that very briefly. And honestly, like, it makes me ashamed to say that I went there. I'm not proud to say that I went to Penn State anymore. And it sucks because Penn State's a great school, obviously. Like, you guys all go there. I was in a club specifically geared for Penn State news. But it's hard to understand what it's like because in State College, everyone is white. Just being honest with you. Like, I was always the token Black friend in every single friend group that I had. You can't like go anywhere that's like there's like people who like look like I do. Like, it's just not a thing. Like, everywhere you go, you're surrounded by white folks. It's not a bad thing. It's just the demographic of like that school or whatever. It's fine. Yeah, like I saw the response to that whole situation over the summer, and like I was dealing with like stuff here, so I didn't really have time to look at it. But like, and it sucks to say that like the "we are" statement thing. And my first reaction was like, "We aren't." Clearly we aren't. Like, something here isn't being done. And it's not the most friendly thing to walk around every day on a campus that like no one really looks like you, right? Like, you feel kind of like alienated and isolated and stuff like that. I remember very specifically, really quick story. I was a bouncer for 3 years in college, so I spent a lot of times like talking to people and like stuff like that. There was one night in particular, I was working my last semester, and you know, this drunk girl came up to me and like just like talking. And the first thing she asked me was like, "Where's the culture around here?" And I was like, "Oh, like and then I tried to answer, but I didn't really have one. Like, I knew what she was asking. Like, where's the authentic like cultural food? Where's like the authentic cultural spot to go? Like, is there like a bar that like caters to that sort of thing? That's not like just a white experience." And I tried to answer, I didn't have one because I legitimately didn't know a place like where the culture was. And like, that's a very vague question, but you kind of know what she's asking. Like, you can't really go to a bar that's like cultural. I mean, I guess Den is the closest thing we have, I guess. And don't get me wrong, I have had plenty of good time there, but there's not like, where's like the Latino American spot? Like, where's like the Chinese American food spot we can go to? Like, what are your food options in State College? Like pizza, calzones, McDonald's, Subway? Like, there's some great like hidden gems there too. Like Green Bowl, I remember that. But like, where's the culture? I don't know. And I don't think State College is enough to incentivize having people of color attend or do enough to create a space for them that they feel comfortable in. And like, I saw the statements that they made and all of that stuff, which I don't agree with. In terms of adding the statements to uniforms, I think that's great. I didn't really hear about it until you mentioned it, but even if it is just performative at the end of the day, at least they did something. So I'll take that, and I'll take the small wins that we can get. But yeah, it was a strange 4 years at Penn State, being someone who doesn't look like everybody else.
Just wanted to say thank you again for all your time and this awesome conversation that
Absolutely.
we're having. But
my pleasure.
what would you say to someone like me or someone like Peo or someone like Ogden that's not a person of color, that's a white person, about this movement and what we can do to help without taking away from like spotlighting the Black voices.
Just listen. Just come and listen. Obviously, I think the leadership space should always be reserved for Black folks, people of color, women, LGBTQ+. But as white people, you can come and listen. And that ear, you might not be able to use your voice as much, and you can always use your voice for agreeing and aligning with what we're saying. And please feel free to chant with us. And especially if you legitimately believe this, definitely feel free to do so. But just come and listen. Like, there's so many, like I was saying before, several times already, there's so many different stories to be heard here. Like, everyone has a story. And that's part of the reason why I love photography so much, is just capturing stories and like even not even knowing somebody's story, but like making one up. You know, like you might look at somebody on the street and be like, huh, like what has their life path been and why are they here now? So you can come to one of these events. So I know there's a Breonna Taylor march in State College, and I saw that on Twitter. I was like, that's freaking dope. Like that really made me feel good, because like happening in State College to me was like, wow, like that's really important, you know, because State College is so white. Like that means a lot to me. But come out to one of those things and just listen to people, like talk to Black women, talk to LGBTQ+ people of color, Indigenous people, talk to Black men in that space, and just like get their experiences. And like when you get those experiences, like I was telling Peo earlier with his students, you can pass that on to people in your community or in your direct circle of contact or your circle of friends, and be like, man, I went to this Breonna Taylor march in State College on Saturday, and I talked to XYZ person, and they told me about this thing that happened to them, or like this thing that we can also show up to next week, or this event, or just give me a different perspective on like what I can do to be better. Like you don't necessarily have to be leading, and I wouldn't advise that you would do that. But if you just show up and listen, like that means a lot, because you're not only validating your own experience by being there as a listener. If someone is given the opportunity to tell their story and you're legitimately so interested in it and take points away from it, you're validating their experience too. Because like I was saying earlier, some of my favorite experiences through this whole thing have just been talking to people and like just feeling validated and like welcomed in the space. So if you guys can do that, that's like, you're like 95% of the way there. Like that's just being able to be heard is such an important thing.
Oyoma, thank you so much again for joining. This was just let the people know where they can find your incredible photography and documentation.
Yeah, right now Instagram is our primary platform. You can follow _OYOMA, just my first name with an underscore in the front. Twitter as well. I'm like kind of like not as active reporting there, but there's some great people I work with on the ground who are also my fellow street journalists, like Chuck Moody and Black House News, and I retweet their stuff on Twitter all the time, but Instagram is my primary platform. So if you follow there and on Twitter, you can definitely see a bunch of other people who are doing the same exact thing I'm doing in different ways, and doing it in a lot quicker than I do it sometimes too. And more like this is happening right now sort of thing. So definitely check it out there. If I also can plug the organization that I work with closely, it's They Them Collective on Instagram, at They Them Collective. That's a group of queer, trans, non-binary, femme, people of color, Indigenous, and we march every single Saturday. We also do, before the march, we do mutual aid event, which is called Feed the People. So our mantra is like, free the people, fight the power, fuck the police. It's all FTP. And our mutual aid is called Feed the People. So we do a clothing drive. You know, we do this thing called Hot Din, where we make meals and we hand them out to the homeless population in DuPont Circle. And we, you know, especially now that winter's coming and it's getting colder, we do drives for like jackets and socks and shirts and stuff like that. And if you want to donate to that organization, you definitely can. The link to supporting the Hot Din effort is in the bio for that organization. I'd also just like to thank them for allowing me to come and be a participant and an activist and a leader in that space, especially as like an ally. And that group has done more for me than I could ever put into words. So definitely check them out as well. That's the group that I work the most closely with. And you can also, through them, find the other organizations that operate here in DC.
Oyoma, thank you again. I can't thank you enough. That was it for this episode of Podward State. We'll catch you guys next week. See you later.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Absolutely, man.